At opposite ends of the American continent, two colossal palaces have stood for over a century, two different answers to the same question. What is the true power of a wealthy empire? Amidst the verdant mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, stands Biltmore, the largest private building America has ever constructed. In the bright sunshine on the shores of Palm Beach, Florida, is Mar-a-Lago, a Spanish and Venetian-inspired palace nestled between the sea and a lake, so opulent it seems straight out of a fairy tale. Biltmore was completed in 1895. In today's currency, its construction cost would be approximately $500 million. 32 years later, in 1927, Mar-a-Lago appeared, swallowing up a vast fortune to transform 17 acres of coastal land into a magnificent architectural stage for America's super-rich. Behind these two structures are two people, two different personalities, two different starting points. George Washington Vanderbilt II, the quiet youngest son of the Vanderbilt family, heir to the most powerful railroad empire in America at the time. Marjorie Merriweather Post, the billionaire, heiress of the Post cereal empire, who transformed the breakfast brand into a massive fortune and became one of the richest women in America. Both possessed something most of us will never attain. So much money that they didn't need to think about enough, only about what will I do with it. George used his wealth to build a chateau in the mountains, combining French architecture, a massive library, art, agriculture, and scientific forestry, with the ambition to create a place that was both a home, a cultural center, and a model for regional development. Marjorie used her wealth to build a seaside palace where winter parties were held with guests including royalty, tycoons, and politicians. The art of hospitality, arrangement, and performance reached a near professional level, and from the very beginning, she envisioned turning this place into a winter White House for the American president. Two dreams, two destinations. But the story we are about to tell is not just which house is bigger, which building is more luxurious, who spends more money. If that were all, it would just be a rich contest between two deceased people. Our real question is, between these two empires, Vanderbilt versus Biltmore, and Post versus Mar-a-Lago, who truly possessed greater power? And power, here is not simply the amount of money in a bank account. Power can be the ability to shape history, to have one's name and work appear in history books and in the memories of generations. The ability to influence culture, to change how people think about wealth, architecture, and lifestyles. The ability to create economic momentum, to transform a poor region into a destination, an engine of development. Or even political power, where decisions affecting millions are made behind stone walls and golden ceilings. In this 90-minute journey, we will travel back in time to the Gilded Age, when the Vanderbilt Empire used railroads to control the American economy. Follow a bookish, quiet youngest son with a vast fortune but little interest in business, to see why he chooses to squander his money on a chateau in the mountains, turning into the world of cereals and advertising, where C.W. Post used the fear of caffeine to sell decaffeinated beverages and left his daughter an inheritance that she would build into the General Foods empire. Join Marjorie as she arrives in Palm Beach, chooses a piece of land with two sides of the sea and lake, and watches her transform it into a winter palace. Then attempts to offer it to the government to be turned into a winter White House, only to be refused. And then, witness how history takes a turn. Mar-a-Lago returns to private ownership, then unexpectedly becomes a winter White House in a different sense, under a new owner. In the end, we will compare the two structures. Biltmore, opening its doors to millions of visitors, becoming a job creator and an architectural and cultural icon. Mar-a-Lago, closed to the masses, yet becoming a political stage where presidents and world leaders meet, where a private residence is thrust directly into the center of global news. The answer may not be simply, one side wins, the other loses. But on the way to that answer, we will understand better what money can buy, what luxury can become more than a beautiful photograph, and what makes a structure not only endure, but continue to hold meaning, even after its builders have passed away more than 100 years ago. That is the story of Biltmore and Mar-a-Lago. It is also the story of ambition, legacy, and and how people strive to conquer time. To understand why Biltmore could survive, we must go back to the origins of the wealth that sustained it, the Vanderbilt Empire. Before the chateau in the mountains, before George Vanderbilt, there was a man who started everything with a small ferry. That was Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt. He was born in 1794 into a poor farming family in Staten Island, New York. In his teens, he dropped out of school early to work on boats, then bought a small ferry to ferry passengers between the harbors. What set Vanderbilt apart wasn't the boat, but his worldview. Where others saw only a stretch of river, he saw the flow of goods, people, and money. Where others earned just enough to eat, he saw a network of transportation. Step by step, he buy more boats, open new routes. He competed on price, speed, and ruthlessly tough. By the time he was 30, Vanderbilt was no longer a ferryman but a steamship tycoon along the east coast of the United States. But he didn't stop there. When railroads emerged, Vanderbilt understood. If steamships were the lifeblood of the 19th century, then railroads would be the lifeblood of the future. He gradually shifted his capital and focus to railroads. And as before with steamships, he didn't play it small. His strategy was acquire weak, unprofitable railroad lines, consolidate many disparate lines into a seamless, efficient network, force competitors to sell, or force them out of the market through price wars and monopolistic agreements. Vanderbilt is not described as a nice person. He embodied the wild era of capitalism, where business ethics weren't the top priority. But undeniably, he was very good at it. When he died in 1877, his fortune was estimated at around $100 million in the time. If converted to today's currency, that would be equivalent to over $2 billion, enough to make him the richest American ever to live at that time. That enormous sum wasn't divided among all his descendants. Vanderbilt followed a maintain the estate intact philosophy. The majority of his wealth was passed on to one son, William Henry Vanderbilt. William not only inherited it, but multiplied it. Within 8 years of his father's death, he turned $100 million into $200 million through strict management of the railroad network, cutting waste, leveraging monopolies. Thus, when it comes to their children and grandchildren, they are not just born into luxury, but into a veritable mountain of gold. And when the money is so abundant, exceeding the need for comfortable living, the next question arises. How do you show people just how rich you are? In New York, the answer lies in the mansions on Fifth Avenue. Petit Chateau on Fifth Avenue. Triple Palace. A complex of 3 interconnected houses/palaces for 3 branches of the family. Lavish parties, European imported furnishings. In Newport, Rhode Island, the answer is the Summer Cottages, a charming name that conceals the reality. They are seaside palaces. Marble House, almost a temple made of marble. The Breakers, a massive mansion overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And a host of other wealthy family mansions, competing in terms of splendor. The American super-rich at the time lived in an architectural arms race. Who could build the biggest house? Who could throw the most extravagant parties? Who could invite the true elite to their home? That was the world George Washington Vanderbilt II was born into. George was the youngest son of William Henry Vanderbilt, born in 1862. If you understand the context, you'll see something interesting. George's brothers grew up with the mindset of maintaining and expanding their empire. And when it was George's turn, his fortune was so enormous that it was unrealistic for him to worry about earning more. The result was, his brothers were drawn to the boardroom, stock prices, railway management, political and financial relations. George, from a young age, was drawn to books, paintings, language, questions like, what is beauty? How can a building outlive its owner? Amidst the rivalry between the most powerful families in the country, vying to see who could build the most magnificent house, this youngest son wasn't interested in who went to whom at parties, who was invited to the 400, the list of the 400 most elite people in New York society. George wasn't socially isolated. He just didn't find the game fun. And that very distance between George and the noisy Vanderbilt world is the key to explaining why. He didn't build another Fifth Avenue palace. He didn't want a cottage in Newport like his brothers. Instead, he dreamed of a different kind of palace, far from the noisy avenues, nestled amidst the mountains and forests, and carrying a mission far greater than simply proving my family is rich. In George's mind, the railroad fortune left behind by Commodore and William Henry Vanderbilt was not just money to spend, but fuel for a daring experiment. Is it possible to use the wealth of an industrial empire to build an estate, a laboratory, a cultural center that would survive for generations? His answer, that's Biltmore. But before going to Biltmore, he needed something important: mindset and inspiration, which he would seek in Europe. George Washington Vanderbilt, too, was unlike anyone else in his family. In an empire where every member was expected to become a businessman, politician, or at least a participant in the power games of the elite, George gravitated toward a different world: knowledge, art, and silence. He was born in 1862 into a family that had become incredibly wealthy. But this very wealth inadvertently gave George a freedom his brothers lacked. No one forced him to make money. No one wanted him to head the railroad. And he certainly didn't want to. 1. The unusual childhood of the bookworm youngest son. George was sickly from a young age. Prolonged illnesses kept him bedridden for weeks, even months. What might have been a tragedy, 4 others became the foundation of George's character. He read, and then read again. He read so much that everyone in the family knew George lived more in books than in real life. As he grew up, his personal library had over 23,000 books, a number many universities at the time couldn't match. He read everything: classical literature, philosophy, linguistics, forestry, agriculture, architecture, Renaissance art, European history. George didn't read to show off his knowledge. He read because he truly loved learning. His father, William Henry Vanderbilt, was sometimes worried. In William's eyes, George was too soft, too introverted, too detached from the pragmatic world of profit, railroads, and business. But his mother, Maria Louisa, saw a different potential. She believed, George won't become the railroad king, but he will create something that no one else in this family has created. And she was the one who encouraged George to travel more, to see more, to enrich his spiritual world. 2. An intellect inclined towards language and art. George didn't just read. He learned many languages. By his teenage years, he could read Latin, Ancient Greek, Hebrew, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and several other languages. Not to show off. He learned because he wanted to read original books. In the wealthy world of Vanderbilt, George was always the one who spoke most softly, was the most reserved, appeared least at social events. He disliked the fancy balls, which the New York elite of 1880 considered a social obligation. He found the displays of wealth, the empty conversations, the subtle rivalries, all meaningless. He felt most comfortable when sitting in the library, researching a new subject, or immersing himself in art. In a family where everyone tried to prove their power with money, real estate, and influence, George wanted to prove his worth through knowledge and culture. 3. The grand tours and the awakening. Like most wealthy Americans of that time, George went on a grand tour of Europe. But unlike most of them, who only went to shop, attend parties, and take pictures, George went like a serious student. In Paris, he could sit for hours just looking at a painting. In Rome, he sketched architectural details in his notebook. In Florence, he viewed Renaissance statues not to show off, but to understand. He saw architecture not just as houses, but as the embodiment of culture, history, social thought, and the very soul of a nation. But the most important point was the Loire Valley in France, where the French royal chateaux from the 15th and 16th centuries still stand tall. Blois, with its dramatic spiral staircase. Chenonceau, spanning the river like a giant sculpture. Chambord, with its magnificent roof and fortress-like chimneys. Here, George awakened to a new idea. America has wealthy people, but no private cultural project can compare to Europe, where architecture is intertwined with art, knowledge, and land preservation. George didn't want to build a large house. He wanted to create an institution, a place to preserve art, support education, modern agricultural and forestry experiments, and enduring long after his death. 4. George chooses his own path. Upon returning to New York, George saw even more clearly the gap between himself and the upper class. His brother was competing to build palaces on Fifth Avenue. The 400 society revolved around guest lists, dinner parties, and backroom deals. But George wondered, why build a house to prove you're richer than others? Why not build a place whose value transcends your own life? He knew he didn't fit in with Newport or Manhattan. He needed a place far enough to create his own world, spacious enough to realize a vision, empty enough for him to build from scratch. And the answer would appear during a trip with his mother to a small mountain town, Asheville, North Carolina. But that's a story for the next chapter. While mansions on Fifth Avenue and in Newport had become the familiar playgrounds of the super-rich, George Vanderbilt stood outside that race. He didn't want a palace in the heart of Manhattan to flaunt his status, nor a beachfront villa in Newport to join a lavish pursuit he found pointless. He wanted a place of his own, a quiet place, a place free from the expectations of high society. And surprisingly, the answer came from his mother's illness. 1. Asheville, a health trip that led to a turning point. In 1888, George's mother, Maria Louisa Vanderbilt, suffered a relapse of malaria. One of the popular treatments at the time was to take patients to high-altitude areas with fresh air and low humidity. The doctor recommended she go to Asheville, a small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. George accompanied his mother. His mindset simple: to care for her, not to seek inspiration. When the train arrived at Asheville Station, George disembarked and immediately knew that this place was unlike anything he had ever seen. Before him, endless green mountain ranges, one layer upon another like green waves. In the morning, mist rose from the deep valleys like a natural ritual. The air was cool and pleasant, not humid like New York or hot and humid like the South. And most importantly, vast, unspoiled, undeveloped land. George, who had viewed the lawyer with the eyes of an architecture and landscape lover, looked at Asheville and thought, if Europe has its own chateaus, then this place could become the American version, in a completely new way. 2. A vast tract of land at an unbelievably low price. In New York, even a small plot of land could cost a fortune. But in Asheville in 1888, George discovered he could buy hundreds, then thousands of acres of woodland at prices so low they were almost absurd compared to his family's wealth. There was no real limit to the scale. There were no wealthy neighbors competing over walls or pottery collections. Asheville was a blank canvas. And George felt, for the first time in his life, free to paint on it a vision no one had ever imagined. 3. A secret land-buying campaign. George didn't buy the land himself. He knew that if the locals knew a Vanderbilt was buying, land prices would skyrocket immediately. So he hired various brokers, bid small plots from families who had lived there for generations, never revealed his identity. Each transaction was a piece of the puzzle. With each passing day, the Vanderbilt map in Asheville grew larger. By the time the buying and selling was complete, everyone realized George Vanderbilt owned approximately 125,000 acres, more than 500 square kilometers of land. This was the largest privately owned estate in the eastern United States at the time, many times larger than Washington, D.C., a landmass large enough to create a self-contained world. The people of Asheville whispered to each other, what is he going to do with all that land? Open a coal mine? Build a factory? Start a forestry company? No one could have guessed correctly, because what George intended to do, no one in America had ever done before. 4. A vision shaped by Europe. The Loire chateaux were not just beautiful. They were cultural centers, art archives, knowledge nurseries, symbols of soft power. George brought that idea to America and wanted to create a modern version suitable for the rapidly developing nation. His idea was unlike any of his brothers. Not a place for lavish parties, not a place to show off wealth, not a place to compete in high society. He wanted an American chateau, a blend of European art and modern technology, a forestry research center, because he believed that American forests needed sustainable management, a model farm where agriculture is done scientifically instead of by habit, a nature reserve for future generations. And deep down, he had another dream, a place to preserve everything he loved, books, paintings, knowledge, as a personal legacy. 5. Asheville is the answer. George didn't choose Asheville just for its beauty. He chose it because it was the only place that allowed him to build a world from scratch. In New York, everything was limited. Space, regulations, social competition, the opinions of others. In Asheville, he had unlimited space, unlimited freedom, and a good reason to help his mother receive treatment in a healthy environment. Asheville wasn't a random destination. It was the only place where George's vision could become a reality. Now he had a vision, land, the assets to turn his dream into reality. The next thing he needed was an architect who could understand and share that vision. And there was only one person in America at that time who deserved that role: Richard Morris Hunt, the #1 architect of the Gilded Age. Having found the ideal plot of land for his dream, George Vanderbilt knew the next step was crucial. He needed someone who was not only technically skilled, but also understood his cultural ambitions. Someone who could combine European architecture, American scale, modern technology, and a refined artistic spirit. In all of America, only one person possessed all of these qualities: Richard Morris Hunt. 1. Hunt, America's #1 architect. At the end of the 19th century, Hunt was a shining name in the architectural world. The first American to graduate from the École des Beaux-Arts, the most prestigious architecture school in the world at the time. The man who brought French and Italian Renaissance architectural styles to America. The architect of iconic buildings such as the Newport super-rich family home, Marble House for William Kissam Vanderbilt, the Breakers for Cornelius Vanderbilt too. Hunt didn't just build big houses. He built big houses with character, houses that both showcased wealth and conveyed culture. George considered Hunt the only one who could transform 125,000 acres of mountain land into a true American chateau. 2. Summer 1889, Hunt arrives in Asheville. Hunt arrived in Asheville by train one summer day in 1889. When he disembarked, he didn't see the valley where a rich man wants to build a mansion. He saw a natural theatrical setting. Hunt spent many days walking in the woods, observing the direction of the morning and afternoon light, looking at the slopes of the hills, the wind, the fog, maintaining meticulous notes in his sketchbook. Among those notes, there was a simple sentence that expressed his vision: the house must appear at the right time, in the right way, as the end of a journey, not as something we see immediately. He immediately understood that this building could not simply be a big house. It had to be an event, a dramatic moment, a cultural statement. 3. The beginning of Biltmore's architecture. Upon returning to New York, Hunt began sketching the first drawings for what would become America's largest private house. From the lawyer, he borrowed Vaudois-style spiral staircases, Chenonceau-style long corridors and vaulted ceilings, Chabot-style roofs with towers and chimneys. But Hunt didn't copy. He transformed them in an American way. Every proportion was magnified. The structure was reinforced. Modern technology was integrated into the classical stone walls. The building had to both evoke Europe and affirm a new American identity. 4. Modern technology, something Europe hadn't yet achieved. George didn't want a chateau to be just beautiful. He wanted it to be incredibly comfortable. Hunt completely agreed. They agreed to incorporate into Biltmore an electrical system supported by Thomas Edison's team. Central heating hidden within the walls. Hot and cold water running throughout the house. An indoor swimming pool with underwater lights, almost unheard of in America at the time. A large-scale refrigeration and food storage system. A bowling alley, a gym, a wine cellar, and an art gallery. If French chateaux were nostalgic, then Biltmore had to be the future wrapped in the shell of the past. George liked that idea. Hunt considered it the most exciting challenge of his career. 5. Unprecedented scale of construction. To build this structure, Hunt proposed hundreds of requirements for materials, craftsmanship, specialized equipment, and manpower. George responded to almost all of them with, "Just choose the best." And so, Indian limestone was transported by ship to the foothills. Marble from Italy arrived by steamship. Oak wood from across the United States was brought to Asheville. A separate railway was built solely to transport materials up the hill. At its peak, more than 1,000 workers toiled day and night. A temporary town sprang up next to the construction site. Never before had a private project in America operated like such a large national undertaking. 6. But the house is only half the story. George didn't just want a beautiful house. He wanted the landscape to support and enhance the architecture. That's where the second key figure comes in. Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of American landscape architecture, who designed Central Park. Hunt will build the house. Olmsted will build the world around the house. Two geniuses, along with a visionary owner, are about to create one of the greatest architectural and landscape marvels in American history. The following section will tell how Olmsted transformed a barren wasteland into the landscape that makes Biltmore a complete work of art, not just a beautiful building. When Richard Morris Hunt sketched the design for Biltmore, George Vanderbilt understood that architecture was only half the dream. The other half lay in the landscape, the very thing that would determine the entire feeling visitors had as they approached the house. And to achieve that, he needed the best in America. That person was Frederick Law Olmsted. 1. Olmsted, a landscape genius in his dementience. When George approached him, Olmsted was 66 years old. His health was failing, his memory was sometimes unstable, and he had planned to retire. But when he heard about this project, an opportunity to combine European architecture with a vast, unspoiled landscape spanning hundreds of thousands of acres, Olmsted felt a renewed sense of inspiration. He accepted. His reason was simple. This isn't just designing a garden. This is designing a world. 2. Start with the fundamental question. What will the entrance look like? Olmsted once said that a beautiful house can be ruined simply because the entrance to it is terrible. He didn't want Biltmore to appear as ostentatious structure the moment guests arrived. He wanted it to appear as a fleeting moment. So, he outlined a nearly 3-mile route from the main gate to the house. This route winds through the forest, passes through sections of tall, dense trees, then opens up to sudden bursts of light, and only finally reveals Biltmore, much like how Europe designs palaces and natural parks. When guests arrive, they must pass through untouched forest, a sense of nature, well-maintained forest, a sense of order, expanding lawns, a sense of anticipation. The house appeared a feeling of awe. It was a psychological exercise. 3. Transforming a depleted forest into an ecological forest. Before buying the land, George didn't know that the area had been overlogging, burning the forest for agriculture, planting unsuitable tree species. Olmsted looked around and saw bare hills, erosion, dry streams, chaotic forest. But instead of criticizing, he told George, if you want this place to be beautiful, you have to start with science. And so they agreed. Replant the forest. Choose tree species suitable for the climate. Re-excavate the small streams to restore the ecosystem. Create multiple layers of vegetation like a natural forest. This wasn't just about beautification. This was the largest forest restoration model in America at that time. 4. Formal gardens. Biltmore is more than just forest. Near the main house, Olmsted designed a French-style formal garden with symmetrical lines, an Italian garden with a long pergola running along the hillside, a walled garden, a 4-acre walled garden for growing seasonal flowers, a conservatory, a giant greenhouse for growing orchids, pineapples, and tropical plants. Each garden was designed to have different colors according to the season, have its own focal point, lead the eye toward the distant mountains or toward the main house. 5. Biltmore Village, a town for the staff. George didn't just want to build a castle. He wanted an exemplary community. Olmsted designed a small village at the foot of the hill, housing for the workers, a church, a small hospital, shops, walkways, and horse-drawn carriage routes. This is a common rational idea in Olmsted's philosophy. A workplace that makes people happy is essential for a complete landscape. 6. Biltmore as a national laboratory. George didn't want his forest to be just for viewing. He wanted it to become America's first forestry research center. With Olmsted as an advisor, George hired a talented young American who had studied forestry in France and Germany. Gifford Pinchot. Pinchot implemented sustainable forest management, selective logging, reforestation after logging, measuring tree age, growth rate, and soil moisture. This was the first time in America that someone practiced forestry in the European style. Biltmore thus became a beacon of American forestry. Later, Pinchot became the founder of the United States Forest Service, and his ideas spread throughout the country. 7. Biltmore, a complete ecosystem. When combined, Hunt's architectural ideas, George's cultural vision, and Olmsted's landscape and ecological philosophy, Biltmore is no longer just a big house. It becomes a living art museum, a monumental architectural work, a forest reserve, a model of agricultural and forestry development, a small residential community, and a cultural manifesto of the Gilded Age. The following section will recount the massive construction process, where thousands of workers transformed blueprints into one of the greatest architectural wonders in American history. When Richard Morris Hunt and Frederick Law Olmsted finalized the design for Biltmore, the most difficult part remained, turning that colossal dream into a physical reality. And the construction of Biltmore was not just about building a structure. It was about setting up an unprecedented construction machine in the history of American private architecture. 1. A construction site so large that it required building an entire temporary town. In early 1889, horse-drawn carts, ox carts, and trains began bringing materials into Asheville. But immediately a problem arose. How to get the stone, wood, steel, brick, and hundreds of other materials to the hilltop where George wanted to build the castle? George and Hunt's solution was very Vanderbilt. Build a separate railroad, several kilometers long, solely to transport materials from the main tracks to the construction site. Establish temporary housing for hundreds of workers. They built warehouses, workshops, kitchens, a wagon garage, and a complete logistics system. Within a few years, the land around Biltmore transformed into a miniature industrial town. Lights shone all night, the sounds of stone chiseling and wood sawing echoed throughout the valley. 2. Materials from across America and Europe flowed into Asheville. George's house didn't use good materials, but the best materials available in the world. The list of materials was astonishing to people at the time. Indian limestone, shipped to North Carolina by train, then transported up the hill by a private railroad. Italian marble, imported from quarries near Genoa. American oak, carefully selected to classical carving standards. Slate from England, a type that would last for hundreds of years. Wrought iron from the best craftsmen in the Northeast. Every material, if it didn't meet the highest quality standards, was immediately rejected. 3. Over 1,000 workers working simultaneously. Grand orchestra of labor. At its peak, the Biltmore construction site had over 1,000 workers, dozens of engineers, hundreds of stonemasons, carpenters, ironworkers, and masons, and countless support staff, cooks, transporters, medical personnel. Each group worked like a team in a large orchestra, requiring absolute coordination. The foundations had to be completed before the stones arrived. The stones had to be laid before the carpenters began decorating the interior. The steel frame had to be erected before the slate roof was installed. If one part was slow, the entire project could be delayed by months. This scale was almost like a national public works project, not a private home. 4. The most advanced technology of its time, far surpassing Europe. Many French chateaux possessed a timeless beauty, but were inconvenient to live in. No hot water, no electricity, no complete heating system, no fully equipped bathrooms. George wanted the opposite. Hunt was tasked with integrating the most modern technologies into a structure with a Renaissance feel. The Biltmore featured an electrical system designed by Thomas Edison's company, a central heating system distributing heat throughout the rooms during winter, a pressurized water system providing hot and cold water to dozens of bathrooms, an indoor swimming pool with underwater lights, a rarity at the time, an indoor bowling alley, a large wine cellar, and a gymnasium. This is why many modern people are amazed when they enter Biltmore. The 1895 building is more modern than many buildings from 1930. 5. Every interior detail is selected like a work of art. A team of artisans from both America and Europe were invited to carve wood, carve stone, make railings and stair banisters, paint walls and decorate ceilings, install stained glass windows, arrange carpets and furniture imported from Europe. No detail is considered secondary. Even door handles, hinges, and fireplaces are custom designed to match the overall architectural style. 6. The enormous cost, and George didn't hesitate. The total cost of building the Biltmore main house, approximately $6 million at the time, equivalent to over $180 million today. If you add land purchase, design, interior, gardening, construction of Biltmore Village, the total cost easily exceeded $10 million in 1895, approximately $300 million in modern terms. For many families, that figure would be unattainable. But for George, the important thing wasn't the cost, but the vision's magnitude. 7. A not-so-economical project, but one with a purpose. New York's elite debated. What is George building? A castle to live in or a museum? Is this a house or a crazy project? But in reality, George was doing something very few wealthy people at the time considered. He wasn't building a house for a lifetime. He was building a legacy to last for generations. 8. A rare combination of three geniuses. By the end of construction, Biltmore bore the mark of three men. George Vanderbilt, cultural, vision, and intellect. Richard Morris Hunt, masterful architecture. Freed Law Olmsted, a vibrant landscape like a work of art. This combination happened only once in the history of American architecture, and it created Biltmore House, the largest private building in America, and to this day, no one has surpassed it. After 6 years of unprecedented construction, Biltmore House was finally preparing to open. It was not just the completion of a building. It was the birth of a new world, where George Vanderbilt wished to blend art, knowledge, and nature into a single whole. And he chose a symbolic moment to unveil his masterpiece. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1895. 1. Opening night. Biltmore enters history. As darkness fell over the Blue Ridge Mountains, hundreds of electric lights, a radiance few houses possessed at the time, illuminating the creamy limestone face of Biltmore, making the building look like a glowing castle amidst the mountains. George's guests, the Vanderbilt family, scholars, artists, close friends, all arrived by train at Asheville Station and were then transported by horse-drawn carriage up the hill. As they entered the Grand Hall, the first sight was breathtaking. A 40-foot-tall Christmas tree stood in the center of the entrance hall. Electric lights reflected off the marble, creating a sense of opulence unmatched by any hall in New York. The scent of oak, pine, and Christmas cake filled the rooms. George, the quiet host, only smiled as his guests gasped in admiration. This was the moment he had envisioned for years. 2. An American aristocratic life, but without ostentatious extravagance. After its official opening, Biltmore became a center of intellectual and artistic gatherings, unlike the ostentatious parties of Newport. Guests at Biltmore often stay for weeks, even months. Because this isn't a place to visit for a night and then leave, it's a living experience. During the day, guests can hunt in the expertly managed forest, ride horses along the winding mountain paths, stroll through the Italian garden or the walled garden, row a boat on Bass Pond, read in George's library of 23,000 books. In the evening, everyone returns to dinner in the 7-story banquet hall, listen to music, discuss literature and art, relax in the luxurious guest rooms. No one calls this a lavish party. It's more like an intellectual environment for the elite, where George reigns supreme in his own unique style. He's not loud. He doesn't boast. He just wants people to appreciate the beauty of the place. 3. Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, the woman who transformed Biltmore into a home. In 1898, George married Edith, an elegant, intelligent woman with strong social ideals. Edith's arrival changed the atmosphere of Biltmore. The house became warmer, parties were less formal, and charitable activities were intensified. Edith believed that great wealth came with great responsibility. She supported schools for the children of employees, the local church, community projects for the poor in the area. In 1900, they had their only daughter, Cornelia Vanderbilt. From then on, Biltmore was more than just a chateau. It became a family. 4. The Golden Age of Biltmore. For about 15 years, from 1895 to World War I, Biltmore experienced its golden age. The American economy boomed. Visitors grew steadily. Agricultural and forestry projects flourished. Gardens, landscaping, and the surrounding community all developed according to George's vision. George himself continued, collecting art, developing the library, supporting advanced agricultural research. Biltmore became a destination mentioned in letters from many prominent scholars and authors of the time. It was not just a symbol of wealth, it was a symbol of culture and enlightenment. 5. But behind the light lay a silent shadow, operating costs. Even in its most successful years, Biltmore carried a huge burden. Operating costs amounted to $250,000 per year, equivalent to $7 million today. Expenses included hundreds of employees, repairs to the roof tiles, stone, electricity, and plumbing, maintaining the forest and farm, raising horses, tending the gardens, maintaining the greenhouses, organizing parties, hosting guests, and providing service. Although the Vanderbilts were very wealthy, even they saw a building like Biltmore as a sleeping dragon, one that would devour money relentlessly upon waking. George understood that. Edith understood that. But they still tried to keep Biltmore running according to their vision. 6. An unexpected tragedy. In 1914, George suffered from appendicitis and underwent emergency surgery in Washington, D.C. What seemed like a simple surgery turned into a tragedy. George died at the age of 51. The whole nation was shocked. Edith was devastated. Cornelia was only 13 years old. And Biltmore, the project George had poured his heart and soul into, suddenly became too big, too expensive, too difficult to maintain. The sudden death of George Vanderbilt in 1914 left not only Edith and her young daughter Cornelia heartbroken, it also put Biltmore in its most precarious state since its construction. The house was too big, the cost was too high, and the only person with a complete vision of how to run it, George, was gone. Edith, only 41 years old, faced a nearly impossible task, keeping her husband's legacy afloat. 1. Edith, the woman battling a massive legacy. Despite her experience in management, Edith was overwhelmed by the numbers. $250,000 a year to maintain Biltmore, equivalent to $7 million today. For most families, that would be a bankruptcy cost. For the Vanderbilt family, it was still a terrifying figure. Edith didn't want to sell Biltmore. She didn't want to demolish it. She didn't want to let the building George loved most fall into the hands of others. But she also understood one thing. If things didn't change, Biltmore would collapse under its own weight. 2. A bold decision, selling 87,000 acres of forest land. In the very year George died, Edith made the most difficult decision to sell most of Biltmore's forest land to the U.S. government. Specifically, she sold 87,000 acres to the government for approximately $400,000, equivalent to $11 million today. This was money to cover expenses, to reduce the enormous amount of land she had to manage, and to protect the forest from commercial exploitation. But more importantly, this was the first piece of Pisgah National Forest, one of the most famous national forests in the United States. What George had dreamed of, Biltmore will change the way America manages forests, has come true in an unexpected way. 3. Preserving the Biltmore farm, forest, and community. Despite having to reduce land, Edith did not abandon the ecosystem that George had worked so hard to build. She continued, maintaining the Biltmore farm, developing livestock farming, crop cultivation, and dairy production, retaining Carl Schenk's forestry team, maintaining Biltmore Village as a model community. Edith did not see herself as the owner of a castle, but as the steward of a living legacy. 4. New love, new responsibility. In 1925, Edith remarried Peter Gerry, a Rhode Island senator. This meant she had to divide her time between Washington, D.C. and Asheville. Biltmore was often empty. Meanwhile, operating costs continued to rise. The large buildings, heating systems, swimming pools, electrical systems, all deteriorated over time. Edith understood that the Vanderbilt style of spending couldn't continue indefinitely. She needed a long-term solution. 5. 1930. The decision to open Biltmore to the public. This was an unprecedented decision in the history of the Vanderbilt family. A private castle, built to live in, was transformed into an entrance-based tourist attraction. Ticket price, $2, equivalent to about $35 today. Ordinary people, for the first time in their lives, were allowed to enter a French-style palace right in the middle of America. Why did Edith do this? To create a sustainable source of revenue, to keep Biltmore alive during the Great Depression, and because she believed George would want the building to be shared with everyone, not just the elite. This decision saved Biltmore. It also paved the way for Biltmore to become the largest privately owned tourist attraction in America, one of the most famous historical buildings in the world. 6. And then, World War II arrived. At the beginning of World War II, a new threat emerged. Bombing of major American cities, something the government feared. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., had to find a safe place to store its masterpieces. Rembrandt, Vermeer, Raphael, Da Vinci, all were too precious to risk keeping in the capital. The government chose Biltmore. During the war years, military trucks secretly transported paintings from Washington to Asheville. They were sealed and protected in the thick basement of Biltmore. No one in the area knew they were living next to an invaluable art treasure. Once again, George's legacy inadvertently contributed to American culture in an unforeseen way. 7. After the war, Biltmore was exhausted but not broken. When the war ended, tourists from all over the country flocked to Biltmore, but maintenance costs continued to rise. Cornelia, George and Edith's daughter, was now the legal heir. Cornelia and her husband will continue to keep Biltmore running, but the real solution to saving the castle will only come later, from the generations of their grandchildren. Biltmore is not out of the woods, but it has survived the death of its owner, a financial crisis, an economic depression, and even a world war. A magnificent legacy that has proven itself far stronger than the upheavals of the times. After following Biltmore's arduous journey of formation and survival, the story now shifts to a completely different extreme. Mar-a-Lago, the Palm Beach mansion, a symbol of roaring 20s luxury, and the brainchild of one of the most powerful female billionaires in American history, Marjorie Merriweather Post. If Biltmore was born from the academic spirit, quietude, and cultural obsession of George Vanderbilt, then Mar-a-Lago was born from joy, drama, social power, and a masterful hospitality of Marjorie. This is where the two empires begin to walk separate paths and create two different kinds of power. 1. From a sickly boy in Battle Creek to the post-grain empire. Marjorie's story began even before she was born, with her father, Charles William Post. C.W. Post wasn't born rich. He suffered from nervous disorders, stomach aches, and nearly had a mental breakdown when he was young. Fortunately, he arrived in Battle Creek, Michigan, in 1891, where the Kellogg brothers were running a sanatorium offering healthy food treatments. Post not only recovered his health, he also saw the biggest business opportunity of his life. If people would pay for bland cereal in the hospital, they would also pay for it at home. And so, 1895, he created Postum, a coffee substitute. 1897, grape nuts were born. 1900, Post Toasties competed directly with Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Thanks to clever marketing and a bit of intimidation, Post became a pioneer of industrialized breakfast. But he didn't live long enough to see how big his empire would grow. In 1914, he committed suicide at the age of 59. He left behind $20 million, equivalent to over $500 million today. And the child who inherited all that money was Marjorie Merriweather Post, 27 years old. 2. An heiress, but not a privileged doll. Most wealthy people at that time viewed their daughters as maintainers of the family image, not involved in business. But Post was different. From the age of 15, he had taken Marjorie to boardrooms, taught her to read financial reports, explained business strategies, and given her access to real projects. When she inherited the company, Marjorie was not a spending-spoiled girl, but a true businesswoman. Under her leadership, the factory was modernized. The brand was elevated to national prominence. And in 1922, she led the merger that formed the Postum Cereal Company, the predecessor of General Foods, the largest food corporation in America at the time. From a young entrepreneur, she became a respected female billionaire. But Marjorie didn't just want to be rich. She wanted to live in a world worthy of that wealth. 3. Palm Beach, the golden age of the elite. In the 1920s, Palm Beach became a winter haven for the American upper class. Thanks to Henry Flagler's railroad, luxury hotels sprang up, private clubs flourished, Mediterranean villas stretched along the coast. Palm Beach was more than just a place to escape the cold. It was a social stage where people came to be seen and to see others. Marjorie arrived at Palm Beach and realized she liked the climate. She liked the pace of life. She liked the party culture. She liked the prospect of being able to gather America's most important figures in a perfectly designed place. And she wanted an architectural complex unlike any other house there. Not a beachfront house, not a Spanish villa, but a palace, large enough to host national events. For Palm Beach's only sea-to-lake plot. In 1924, after months of searching, Marjorie found a plot of land that Palm Beach residents called unbuyable. 17 acres, running from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Worth, meaning it had water at both ends, a unique feature on the entire island. Just as George Vanderbilt chose Asheville because it offered him absolute freedom, Marjorie chose this plot of land because it provided her with the perfect stage. She named it Mar-a-Lago, sea to lake. 5. Preparing to build the palace. Marjorie didn't want beauty, she wanted grandeur. With virtually unlimited funds, Marjorie sought out two men she believed could help her create a masterpiece. Marion Sims Wyeth, the #1 architect in Palm Beach, specializing in designing mansions for the super-rich. Joseph Urban, a painter and stage designer from Vienna, who staged the magnificent Ziegfeld Follies on Broadway. Wyeth brought the technique. Urban brought the soul of the stage. Marjorie, on the other hand, brought her perfectionist obsession. She personally selected thousands of antique bricks from Spain and Portugal, imported stone from Italy, invited carvers from Europe, approved every door, every ceiling panel, every pattern. The architects understood that Marjorie didn't want a villa, she wanted an icon. 6. Two dreams, two paths. At this point, the contrast between Biltmore and Mar-a-Lago becomes clear. Biltmore, Mar-a-Lago. Built in the mountains, built by the sea. Inspired by academia, art inspired by theater, parties. Owner, quiet, introverted owner. Social, extroverted. Purpose, to create a cultural and forestry center. Purpose, to create a national-level diplomatic palace. Construction began 1889. Construction began 1924. These are not two buildings. These are two philosophies of life. And Mar-a-Lago is about to enter its construction phase, a phase that will create one of the most luxurious buildings in American history. With the design complete and the resolve established, Marjorie Merriweather Post entered the most crucial phase, turning Mar-a-Lago into reality. And the construction process created not just a mansion, but an unprecedented architectural stage in Palm Beach. If Biltmore was a symbol of engineering and knowledge, then Mar-a-Lago was a symbol of style, ostentation, and awe. 1. Construction began in 1924. The giant construction machine started operating. After purchasing the land, Marjorie immediately transformed the 17 acres of coastal land into a massive construction site. Hundreds of workers were mobilized. Horse-drawn carriages and heavy trucks moved in and out constantly. The people of Palm Beach soon understood that something enormous was about to appear. No one knew exactly what it would be, only rumors that it would be a Spanish Venice Moorish palace, something no one had ever seen on American soil. Wyeth handled the structure. Urban handled the art. Marjorie handled everything else. 2. Materials from all over the world. Mar-a-Lago became a transit point for the most luxurious materials the 1920s could offer. From Italy, creamy white Doria stone, exquisitely carved columns, Roman and Renaissance style carvings. From Spain and Portugal, 36,000 antique glazed tiles and ceramics, many dating from the 15th century. Floor tiles, wall tiles, ceiling tiles. From the Middle East, Moorish patterns, handcrafted lamps, North African-inspired arches. From the USA, precious wood from the Appalachian region, handcrafted wrought iron from Pennsylvania. Every brick, every slab of stone is personally inspected by Marjorie before installation. If it doesn't meet the standards, it's rejected. There's no such thing as acceptable. 3. Joseph Urban transforms the interior into a golden stage. Upon entering Mar-a-Lago, People often pause for a few seconds to look up at the ceiling. The ceiling of the main living room, nearly 42 feet high, is covered in real gold leaf. Urban didn't want ordinary electric lighting. He wanted it to shimmer like stage lights. Not classic European luxury, but dazzling splendor. The grand dining room is equally dramatic. The ceiling is painted like a sky with drifting clouds. The walls are adorned with European tapestries and paintings. Long tables are prepared for 36 guests at each banquet. The shimmering light creates the illusion of infinite space. Urban has designed stages his whole life. And at Mar-a-Lago, he transforms each room into an endless performance. For Marion Sims Wyeth ensures the structural integrity. Palm Beach has a harsh climate. Blazing sun, high humidity, storms, corrosion from sea salt. If Urban is the artistic soul, then Wyeth is the one who ensures Mar-a-Lago is not only beautiful, but also sustainable. He designed thick walls to withstand strong winds. Choose materials resistant to sea salt. Position the main doors to avoid storms. Raise the foundation to withstand tidal surges. Without Wyeth, Mar-a-Lago might have been a beautiful structure, but one that would have crumbled before the first storm. 5. Open space, a miniature city. Feeling. Mar-a-Lago is not just one large building. It's an architectural complex, including 126 rooms, 58 bedrooms, 33 bathrooms, 12 fireplaces, cloister hallways, gardens, swimming pools, and a 75-foot-tall tower as a focal point. The tower isn't just for decoration. Marjorie wanted guests standing on it to see the Atlantic Ocean in one direction, Lake Worth in the other. 2 bodies of water, 2 views, 2 emotions. 6. Enormous cost, $7 million in 1927, when Mar-a-Lago was completed after 4 years of construction. The total cost was estimated at approximately $7 million, equivalent to $120 to $150 million today. Even for Marjorie, this was still a huge investment, but she didn't see it as an expense. In her diary, she wrote, "This is not just my house. This is a gift I am making to America." A prophetic statement, because Marjorie had dreamed from the beginning that Mar-a-Lago would become the Winter White House. 7. 1927. Mar-a-Lago opens and instantly becomes legend. When the mansion was completed, Marjorie hosted a grand opening. Guests included European royalty, New York tycoons, ambassadors, politicians, artists, and the most influential figures of the time. Everyone agreed. Mar-a-Lago was unlike any other mansion in Palm Beach. It wasn't a house. It was a statement of power and style. 8. 2 buildings, 2 eras, 2 philosophies. In 1927, the world had 2 architectural masterpieces embodying 2 different spirits. Biltmore, 1895, Mar-a-Lago, 1927. Intellectual, academic luxury. Theatrical, introverted versus extroverted. Built for cultural vision, built for social and political vision. Nestled in the mountains, displayed on the Florida coast. If Biltmore was an empire of knowledge, then Mar-a-Lago was an empire of social influence. And the story of true power continues. After Mar-a-Lago was completed in 1927, the mansion became more than just the residence of Marjorie Merriweather Post. It became the center of American high society, a stage where power, beauty, politics, and art blended into a feast that lasted for decades. If Biltmore had its golden age of hunting seasons and intellectual discussions, Mar-a-Lago had its era of lavish parties, celebrity guests, and a radiant hostess at the center. This was the golden age of Mar-a-Lago. 1. Marjorie, hostess with the mostest. From the very first party, Palm Beach elites understood that no one threw a party like Marjorie. She combines a refined aesthetic sense, a masterful stage presence, precise organizational skills, and a keen social intuition. Not every party is extravagant in the sense of ostentation, but every party is perfect down to the smallest detail. People call her the hostess with the mostest, the hostess who possesses everything: style, wealth, taste, charm. And this title is not a compliment, it is the truth. 2. Glorious evenings. Under the golden ceiling of the grand drawing room, Joseph Urban's nearly 42-foot-high drawing room with its golden ceiling is not just for viewing. It's the venue for famous parties. Guests enter and feel as if they've stepped into a Granada or Venice palace. Warm light bounces off the golden surfaces, making everything, clothing, jewelry, enormous vases, shine like something out of a dream. On those evenings, you might see European duchesses laughing with Hollywood actresses, Texas oil tycoons chatting with Washington diplomats, industrial heirs standing alongside Broadway stars. Marjorie stood at the center of the room, gently guiding everyone into their proper places, like an orchestra conductor with a smile and intuition. 3. The guest list, where power concentrates. When it comes to social power, look at who appears at Mar-a-Lago. European royalty, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, members of numerous aristocratic families from England, France, and Austria. Hollywood, movie stars, opera singers, directors and producers. Wall Street, bankers, major brokers, heads of industrial corporations. Washington, D.C., congressmen, ambassadors, diplomats, influential figures in government. And they all know one thing. Receiving an invitation to Mar-a-Lago means you belong to the highest echelons of American society. 4. Marjorie, more than just a party girl, more than a philanthropist. What makes Marjorie respected isn't just her money or her ability to throw parties. She is a great philanthropist, with a rare heart and vision, funding hospitals, helping to open schools, supporting artists, contributing to museums, building community infrastructure. She believes that wealth isn't something to show off, but a tool to improve the lives of others. Many have said, if Marjorie hadn't become a billionaire, she could have been an outstanding diplomat. 5. An icon of the jazz age. The 1920s were a time of jazz, cultural extravagance, bright parties in the dark of night, and wealthy individuals living life to the fullest on the brink of economic crisis. Mar-a-Lago perfectly embodied that spirit. Bold colors, bold lines, elaborate interiors, a blend of Spanish, Venetian, and Moorish styles, and large spaces for gatherings. Unlike Biltmore, contemplative and intellectual, Mar-a-Lago was a vibrant work of art, blending seamlessly into the cultural currents of the era. 6. The tales of the parties. Anecdotes from those who have been to Mar-a-Lago recount dinners lasting for hours, with menus tailored to each guest. Ballrooms open until dawn. Jazz bands from New York flown down to Florida by private plane. Guests strolling under the moonlight through the cloister corridors. And sometimes Marjorie appearing in rare antique jewelry from Russia, items she acquired when her husband was ambassador to the Soviet Union. Mar-a-Lago is more than just a place to live. It's a story everyone wants to be a part of. 7. But behind the glamour lies a bigger dream. Marjorie deeply loves Mar-a-Lago, but she sees in it a potential that transcends the personal realm. From a very early age, she wrote in her diary, "I hope that one day this place will serve the nation. A winter White House for all presidents." This was a vision that, when it was being built, many thought was crazy. Why would the government need a palace in Florida? Who would pay for its maintenance? Why would the president leave Washington for Palm Beach? But Marjorie believed in it, and she was determined to make the dream a reality. 8. Mar-a-Lago reaches the pinnacle of soft power. By the late 1930s, Mar-a-Lago was more than just the most beautiful mansion in Palm Beach. It had become an unofficial diplomatic venue, a place where discreet conversations took place after parties, a springboard for socio-political relations, a symbol of American style during the Golden Age. If Biltmore is a symbol of the Gilded Age, then Mar-a-Lago is a symbol of the Jazz Age and the rise of the modern super-rich. After the Golden Age of Mar-a-Lago, with its parties that lit up Palm Beach, the story of Marjorie Merriweather Post entered a new chapter, more complex, deeper, and sometimes contradictory. Because even though Marjorie was one of the most powerful women in America, she was still human, loving, disappointed, hopeful, and ultimately, leaving a legacy greater than any party she ever hosted. 1. 4 marriages, 4 different chapters of life. Marjorie married for the first time at 18, and by the end of her life, she had been married 4 times. Each marriage shaped a part of who she was and directly influenced Mar-a-Lago. First husband, Edward Bennett Close, a refined New York businessman, but their life together quickly lost its spark. They had 2 daughters. Divorced in 1919, Marjorie realized she needed a life partner who shared her vision. Second husband, Edward Francis Hutton, one of America's most powerful stockbrokers, the founder of E.F. Hutton and Company. This was the most important marriage in terms of finance and image. Hutton understood money, understood the high society lifestyle, understood Marjorie's vision, and supported the construction of Mar-a-Lago from start to finish. When Mar-a-Lago was completed, it also became a symbol of the peak of this marriage. But in 1935, they separated, and Marjorie kept the seaside palace as part of her private estate. Third husband, Joseph E. Davies. A completely different chapter. Davies was a diplomat, appointed as the American ambassador to the Soviet Union. And this led Marjorie to one of the strangest experiences of her life, living for many years in Moscow during Stalin's rule. Importantly, in the Soviet Union, Davies was allowed to acquire many nationalized works of art and jewelry from the Russian imperial period. Marjorie, an art lover, collected hundreds of priceless items: Faberge eggs, jade objects, paintings, Romanov silverware. This collection later became one of the largest collections of Russian art outside of Russia. Davies and Marjorie divorced in 1955. Fourth husband, Herbert A. May, a wealthy businessman from Pittsburgh. This marriage was the shortest, 1958 to 1964, and not very happy. 2. Diplomatic life. Marjorie becomes unofficial ambassador to the Soviet Union. During her time in Moscow, 1937 to 1938, Marjorie hosted parties for politicians, met Soviet leaders, made contact with important figures of the Stalin era. No one in Washington officially assigned her diplomatic duties, but everyone knew. Wherever Marjorie appeared, political relations softened. Journalists at the time called her the Velvet Diplomat. Her sophistication and hospitality, things that once made Mar-a-Lago shine, now became a tool of soft power between the world's 2 most tense nations. 3. The Russian art collection, a treasure that amazes the world. Upon returning to the United States, Marjorie brought back hundreds of Russian works of art: Royal Romanov jewelry, rare and exquisite Faberge eggs, court silverware, paintings, and religious icons. This was no ordinary luxury. Shopping. She understood that these items would disappear without someone to protect them. In a later interview, Marjorie said, "I didn't buy for myself. I bought for the future, because history needs these artifacts." And true to her word, after her death, the collection was donated to the Smithsonian and many major museums, becoming part of America's national heritage. 4. The final years. Mar-a-Lago is more than just a house. Despite multiple marriages, Marjorie never left Mar-a-Lago. It was her spiritual child. But as she approached 70, Marjorie began to realize Mar-a-Lago was too big for one person to maintain. The maintenance costs far exceeded the means of an individual, even a billionaire. And most importantly, if she died, who would properly care for it? Her worries were exactly the same as Edith Vanderbilt's in 1914. But Marjorie had a dream that Edith didn't have. She wanted Mar-a-Lago to become a national treasure, a place where successive U.S. presidents could, working, receiving guests, and spending the winter. A winter White House, not a symbol of the Post family, but a symbol of America. 5. The big decision. Donating Mar-a-Lago to the United States. In 1973, as her health declined, Marjorie made a momentous decision to donate the entirety of Mar-a-Lago to the U.S. government through the Department of the Interior, along with a fund to support initial maintenance. She believed that this building deserved to serve the country. The U.S. president deserved a national residence to receive international guests, and the American people deserved to preserve a unique architectural heritage. That was the dream she had carried with her since the first stone was laid. 6. But life is not a dream. The U.S. government didn't want the gift. Immediately after receiving Mar-a-Lago, the government realized the truth. Maintenance costs up to $1 million per year. Security for the president at Palm Beach will cost many more millions of dollars. The project too extravagant to justify the budget before Congress. No president has shown any willingness to use it. Many in the government said bluntly, "This is a gift we cannot accept." And so, Mar-a-Lago was returned to the Postal Fund in 1980. Marjorie's winter White House dream seemed forever lost. Only one thing made this decision less painful. Marjorie died in 1973 and never knew that the government had refused her gift. 7. Mar-a-Lago entered a period of disorientation. In the years after being returned, maintenance costs exceeded the postal fund's capacity. The mansion deteriorated and was put up for sale for $20 million, but no one dared to buy it. Mar-a-Lago, once a palace shining like a star, now faces the threat of demolition or fragmentation and sale. Its fate seemed tragic, but then a man appeared, using a completely different way of thinking to revive it. A man whose name the world will be deeply connected to in the future. When Mar-a-Lago was returned to the government and left unclaimed, the fate of the Palm Beach Palace seemed sealed. Too large, too expensive, too complicated. But it was at that very moment that a new figure entered the story, one who would completely change the destiny of Mar-a-Lago in ways no one, not even Marjorie Merriweather Post, could have imagined. 1. Mar-a-Lago in the early 1980s, a white elephant. After being returned to the Post Foundation in 1980, Mar-a-Lago became a serious financial burden. Maintenance costs reached $2 to $3 million per year. The interior deteriorated due to years of neglect. The roof, electrical system, and plumbing needed major repairs. Its historical value was high, but it generated no revenue. The Post Fund had no intention of demolishing Marjorie's legacy, but they also couldn't continue to burn money indefinitely. In 1981, Mar-a-Lago was put up for sale for $20 million. No one bought it. Other billionaires looked at it and saw legal complications, sky-high property taxes, strict building restrictions in Palm Beach, and a structure that couldn't be easily renovated or developed. Mar-a-Lago became a symbol of unsustainable luxury. 2. Donald Trump saw what others didn't. In the early 1980s, Donald Trump was in the midst of a massive real estate expansion. Unlike others, Trump didn't see Mar-a-Lago as a difficult legacy to maintain. He saw it as a lever of power. Trump understood 3 things. Mar-a-Lago was rare land. It was impossible to replicate something similar in Palm Beach. Its value lay not in the construction cost, but in its symbolism and location. If exploited properly, it could sustain itself. But Trump didn't buy immediately. He played a long game. 3. The pressure tactic. I will destroy your view. Trump began by buying a small plot of land between Mar-a-Lago and the ocean. Then he revealed his intention to build a tall building or a structure that would block Mar-a-Lago's ocean view. This worried the Post Foundation and Palm Beach residents. Mar-a-Lago's value would plummet if it lost its ocean view, a vital element of real estate there. Meanwhile, the real estate market stalled. Maintenance costs continued to drain money. There were no replacement buyers. The pressure mounted. 4. 1985, the shocking deal. Finally, in 1985, Donald Trump bought Mar-a-Lago for approximately $7 to $10 million, depending on the source, only half or less of the original asking price. It was one of the most shocking real estate deals at the time. A palace worth hundreds of millions of dollars if rebuilt, sold at the price of a large commercial building. Trump didn't just buy land and houses. He bought reputation, history, and a perfect stage for his personal image. 5. Restoration and use as a private residence. After purchasing it, Trump spent millions of dollars to repair the roof, restore the interior, preserve the Spanish brickwork, renovate the gardens and pool, upgrade the technical systems. For many years, Mar-a-Lago was used as a winter retreat for the Trump family, a private reception venue, a symbol of his success in Palm Beach. But the old problem quickly returned. The operating costs were too high. Land taxes, staff, maintenance, all contributed to Mar-a-Lago continuing to be a money-guzzling asset each year. Trump needed a different model. 6. A controversial idea, turning Mar-a-Lago into a private club. In 1995, Trump made a bold decision to transform Mar-a-Lago into a private club. This idea went against the traditional spirit of Palm Beach, where mansions are typically residences, not business premises. Trump's model: high membership fees, Annual fees. Parties. Members allowed to use amenities. The goal was clear: to turn preservation costs into revenue. 7. The legal battle with Palm Beach. This decision immediately led to fierce conflict with local authorities and neighbors. Concerns about noise. Concerns about traffic. Concerns about losing Palm Beach's privacy. The lawsuits dragged on for years. Trump did not compromise. Finally, the two sides reached an agreement, limiting the number of nights Trump could stay at Mar-a-Lago each year, limiting the number of events, strictly regulating operating hours. In return, Mar-a-Lago is allowed to exist as a legally owned private club. 8. Mar-a-Lago is reborn, but in a completely new way. Under the club model, membership fees increase gradually over time. Membership is limited. Revenue is stable. Preservation costs are guaranteed. Mar-a-Lago is no longer a historical burden or a gift the government dares not accept. It becomes a machine of social power, where money, connections, and image converge. Marjorie Merriweather Post wanted Mar-a-Lago to serve the nation. Donald Trump made it serve a very specific elite. Two different visions, but the same result. Mar-a-Lago is saved from oblivion. 9. A new chapter is about to begin. Everything Trump did with Mar-a-Lago in the first 30 years was just the beginning. Because by the year, in 2016, this seaside palace will enter an unprecedented phase in its history, becoming a global center of political power, appearing in every international newspaper, and finally, becoming the embodiment of an unending controversy. When Donald Trump entered the White House in 2017, Mar-a-Lago immediately entered a completely new chapter, a chapter that Marjorie Merriweather Post had dreamed of, but could not have imagined, to be so noisy, controversial, and globalized. From a private club for the super-rich, Mar-a-Lago became the unofficial center of American political power. 1. The Winter White House became a reality. In the early months of his term, Donald Trump announced he would regularly work at Mar-a-Lago during the winter. Meetings, high-level receptions, and policy discussions would take place there. The press immediately gave Mar-a-Lago a name: the Winter White House. What Marjorie had written in her diary as a distant dream now became a reality, literally. But unlike the White House, Mar-a-Lago remains a private property, still charges membership fees, still hosts parties, and retains the essence of a luxurious club. This blend creates an unprecedented precedent in American history. 2. Diplomacy takes place under a golden ceiling. During the presidency, Mar-a-Lago became the venue for hosting world leaders. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and many other heads of state and high-ranking officials. Diplomatic dinners took place in the dining room that Marjorie had designed for social gatherings, under the light reflecting off Joseph Urban's golden ceiling, among club members and non-government guests. This image shocked the world. Global politics were being discussed. In a private club, Mar-a-Lago is not just a backdrop. It has become part of the power story. 3. Controversy erupts. Public-private lines blurred. Immediately, a wave of controversy erupted. Who pays for the president's security at Mar-a-Lago? Why should taxpayers' money be spent on protecting a private club? Is it legal for the president to entertain guests at a place where he has a business interest? Each of Trump's trips to Mar-a-Lago costs millions of dollars in security, local police, federal forces, road closures, and area lockdowns. Mar-a-Lago, from a symbol of luxury, becomes a symbol of political division. 4. Global reputation, love, or hate. Before 2016, many people outside the United States didn't know what Mar-a-Lago was, or only saw it as a luxury villa. After 2017, the name Mar-a-Lago appeared in every international newspaper, was mentioned in United Nations meetings, became a topic of global debate. Ironically, Mar-a-Lago became the most famous real estate in modern America, far surpassing all other historic mansions, including Biltmore. That reputation is not neutral. It has a distinctly political undertone, but its reach is undeniable. 5. Marjorie was right, but in an unexpected way. If Marjorie Merriweather Post could see Mar-a-Lago right now, she would probably have two contrasting emotions. Proud that her Winter White House dream had come true, shocked by how it was used, She envisioned subtle diplomacy, formality, and service to the nation. Reality delivered noisy media, protests, legal disputes, and extreme politicization. But history doesn't ask us whether we like it or not. It only asks, what survives? What continues to have an impact? 6. A reflection on Biltmore. While Mar-a-Lago entered the eye of the political storm, Biltmore continued to exist in silence. No controversy, no politics, no protests. Each year, more than 1.4 million people visit to learn history, to appreciate architecture, to experience heritage. Biltmore represents enduring soft power, lasting influence, and cultural consensus. Mar-a-Lago represents instant power, global attention, and endless conflict. Two paths, two definitions of power. 7. Mar-a-Lago after the presidency. When Trump left the White House in 2021, Mar-a-Lago did not fade into the shadows. On the contrary, it became his primary residence, the center of post-presidency political activities, a venue for events, and the focus of numerous legal investigations. Mar-a-Lago is no longer just a club. It became a living symbol of a political era. 8. A building, yet carrying the weight of history. By this point, Mar-a-Lago had experienced a private residence, a high society center, a rejected government property, a private club, and finally, a center of political power. Few buildings in American history have so many layers of meaning. 9. Preparing for the end, the biggest question. Now looking back, Biltmore survived by opening its doors to everyone. Mar-a-Lago survived by exclusivity in politics. The final question this documentary is about to ask is, which power is more enduring? The power of sharing, or the power of control? Now that both stories have reached their conclusion, we return to the question that has guided this entire journey from the beginning. Between Biltmore and Mar-a-Lago, which empire is truly stronger? But to answer that, we must clarify one thing. Power is not just money. It is influence. It is the ability to survive. It is how long a structure continues to shape society. 1. Two structures, two completely different definitions of power. Biltmore and Mar-a-Lago are not direct adversaries. They represent two different types of power in America. Biltmore was born from knowledge, nurtured culture, developed the regional economy, opened its doors to the public, and endured for over a century. Mar-a-Lago, born from luxury and social splendor, built social influence, concentrated power in the hands of a few, became a global political icon, controversial but unignorable. One side chose to spread influence. The other chose to concentrate. 2. A frank comparison. Who wins on each front? Architecture and scale. Biltmore wins outright. Largest in America. Exquisite. Academic. Affiliated with Richard Morris Hunt and Frederick Law Olmsted. Mar-a-Lago is beautiful, but theatrical. Biltmore is a masterpiece. Economics and social impact. Biltmore wins. Millions of visitors annually. Thousands of jobs. Billions of dollars in economic impact for the entire Asheville area. Mar-a-Lago sustains itself and a small group. Culture and education. Biltmore wins. Students, researchers, visitors worldwide. Biltmore tells the story of the Gilded Age to all levels. Mar-a-Lago tells the story to insiders. Politics and instant power. Mar-a-Lago wins. The venue for high-level diplomacy. The workplace of the president. The focus of global media. Attention. Biltmore never sought political power, and it doesn't possess it. 3. Two founders, two prophecies come true. The most astonishing thing is, both George Vanderbilt and Marjorie Merriweather Post were right. George believed that a great project can change an entire land and the mindset of society. And he was right. Biltmore has done that for over 100 years. Marjorie believed that Mar-a-Lago would become the winter White House. And she was right, only in a way she couldn't have imagined. Two dreams, two paths, two different outcomes, but both came true. 4. Which power is more enduring? Political power is strong, but changes with each term. Cultural power is slow, but lives longer than people. Mar-a-Lago may be the centerpiece of an era. Biltmore is a witness to many eras. One day, politics will change, people will pass away, controversies will subside, but children will still walk into Biltmore. Look up at the ceiling and ask, who built this place? That is when true power is passed on. 5. Final conclusion. If the question is, which empire has the strongest influence today? Mar-a-Lago. But if the question is, which empire will still stand when we are all gone? Biltmore. Biltmore doesn't need noise. It doesn't need controversy. It doesn't need political power. It exists because of something rarer, its enduring significance. 6. Conclusion. 2 buildings. 2 people. 2 American dreams. One nestled in the mountains, open to all. One by the ocean, reserved for the few. And history, as always, doesn't choose one side over the other. It remembers both. But as time passes, only what is shared has the chance to become immortal. After the main story concludes, a quiet question still hangs in the air. What happens to empires after the lights go out, after power departs, after the people are no longer there? Biltmore and Mar-a-Lago are more than just 2 buildings. They are 2 great experiments in American history on how wealth attempts to become immortal. 1. When people disappear, buildings begin to speak. George Vanderbilt had no sons to inherit his legacy. Marjorie Merriweather Post also did not leave behind a true dynasty. Both vanished from the world, but their buildings did not. And from that moment, power no longer rested in the hands of the founder, but in how society decided to use, interpret, and remember that building. Biltmore is told as a story about culture, art, and education. Mar-a-Lago is retold as a story of power, money, and politics. No one controls the story anymore. History has taken over. 2 contrasting destinies in the end. Biltmore today exists as an open space where families, students, and visitors enter without needing privilege, where memory is preserved by repetition, day after day, year after year. Mar-a-Lago today exists as a closed symbol, where power is concentrated and then dispersed, where memory is tied to a specific political period. One side is becoming less and less controversial. The other side has increasingly overlapping layers of meaning. 3. Time is the fairest judge. History shows an unchanging rule. The more power is tied to an individual, it becomes more fragile when that individual leaves. Biltmore is not tied to a current powerful name. Mar-a-Lago is. And that will determine how the 2 structures are perceived in 50, 100, or 200 years from now. Not through the media, not through controversy, but through the prolonged silence of time. 4. A true empire needs no protector. George Vanderbilt is no longer there to protect Biltmore. But Biltmore lives on. Marjorie Post is no longer there to explain her dream. And Mar-a-Lago continues to be interpreted in ways she cannot control. This is the moment every empire faces, when it no longer belongs to its creator, but to how the world uses it. 5. The final conclusion of the post-drama. If there is one final lesson from these 2 works, it is this. Wealth can build stone and gold. Power can attract and that battle never ends.